Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Kay Cabot and Ashley Bastock. Lance Reisland is coming up here shortly as well. And we are talking about the Browns preparing to hire Jim Schwartz as their defensive coordinator. They, of course, at this point have not made the move official, but it's just a matter of time until that does happen. Like I said, coming up after the break, Lance is really going to dig into what he's seen from Jim Schwartz's scheme, do what he does best. He is a teacher, so he's going to teach us all about Jim Schwartz. But here we're going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about the impact Jim Schwartz can have on this defense. Mary Kay, you had written on Monday that, after the Browns completed their interview with Sean Desai, that you thought a coordinator hire was coming soon. It obviously is happening now. What was your reaction to Jim Schwartz being the guy that they chose?
I really thought it was going to come down to him. And the only way I thought Sean Desai could have gotten it is if he absolutely had knocked their socks off yesterday, because Jim Schwartz has so much experience as a coordinator, as a head coach. And the other thing I thought was that Brian Flores was still getting interview requests. So in my mind, I just didn't, even though he was still in the mix all the way up until at some point last night, apparently, I just didn't really think it was going to come down to him. So there was a part of me that thought, well, it's got to be Jim Schwartz if they're doing it as early as today. And as I wrote, as you mentioned yesterday, that they could do it as early as today. So wasn't really surprised about it. The only sort of little twist in there, I think, would have been if they just had decided to go young, new, and somebody a little bit different in Sean Desai. He would have brought a different spin to the table. But I really think that that they had to go on the safer, more experienced side with what happened to them with this defense this year, with the discipline issues that they have, with the sort of splintered defense that it was. Guys are not going to get away with things under Jim Schwartz that they got away with last year. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, Ashley, what was your reaction? And I know you just put up a story right before you hit record here. What your reaction to Schwartz getting hired?
Yeah, my initial reaction, which, like that story you alluded to, is what I wrote about. It just seems like he fits the bill for a lot of these things that, like, we've been saying this defense need, and or like what players have been saying this defense needs. So I think you look at, number one, like Mary Kay said, the discipline issues. Jim Schwartz has been around 30 years in the NFL. He got his start with Bill Belichick. Like she said, there's no way some of this stuff is going to fly. I think he brings a different gravitas with him. I talked about this on the radio too last week, I think, just because of his career and how he got his start and how he has a pattern of turning these defenses around. So that's number one. Number two, he's kind of become known for his run defenses as well, right? I know, Dan, you wrote about how he's turned around defenses before, in particular run defenses, and he'll have a chance to do that here again, obviously. And the other part, it's really interesting. I mean, I know you talked with Lance a lot about his scheme, but with that wide nine scheme, it seems like it just sets up guys to really be able to go after the quarterback and make plays. And when we heard from players after they fired Joe Woods, this thing kept coming up where they were saying sometimes it felt like we were almost being too tricky and trying to trick other teams, and in the process tricking ourselves in a lot of ways, that it all just became too confusing. And he seems like a guy who, you're going to learn that system, you're going to stick in that system, but it's going to give guys a chance to get one-on-one matchups and make plays. So I think all of that is really important, and it kind of fits what players were talking about last week on Getaway Day.
Okay, so Mary Kay, I want to circle back to something we've all kind of made the points here, the discipline, and Ashley, was it you that said the word gravitas? Who was it? I want to give credit. Okay. Ashley, using the word gravitas here. I think that's really important here. Kevin Stefanski basically hired a second head coach, like a head coach for the defense. And to me, it's like, I mean, we talked about it on one of the parts of the Hey MK pod. I'm not sure if it was the part that made it or if the part that's still sitting on my computer right now is we've had to reschedule some things. But this idea that when Jadeveon Clowney decided to only play third downs against Baltimore, the only thing that really happened to him was he had to sit the next game for a series. And there were certain people that would have never flown. I feel like Jim Schwartz fits into that category. Just him being Jim Schwartz, having done this for so long, having won a Super Bowl. that carries. Like, he gets to walk into that building and kind of just be like, hey, I'm Jim Schwartz. We're going to do this thing my way on the defensive side, whether you guys like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no way that something like that would fly under Jim Schwartz. As you mentioned, he's not only been a coordinator for 14 years, he was a head coach for 5 years. So he knows exactly what Kevin Stefanski is going through. I think he'll be an invaluable resource for Kevin Stefanski. He'll be a good sounding board for him. Kevin can just forget about the defense. He doesn't have to worry about it. I mean, he does, the buck stops at his desk, but he does not have to be worrying about what is going on over there on that side of the ball because he has enough on his plate. He has to get Deshaun Watson up to speed and have him playing like the 3-time Pro Bowler that he is. He's going to be revamping an offense. He doesn't need to worry about is Perion Winfrey, showing up on time for a practice or something like that. He doesn't have time for that. So Jim Schwartz is going to, bring a no nonsense brand of football. He comes from the Bill Belichick coaching tree. Really, he was a scout here, for the most part under Bill Belichick, but, he learned the Belichick way early on and credits him with the career that he has had in the NFL. He's probably still close to Nick Saban too. So he's got that whole Belichickian type of pedigree to him. And I think that he will bring the exact kind of discipline that these guys need. You're not going to mess around with Jim Schwartz. He'll get in your face. He'll do whatever he has to do to make sure that these guys are falling into line. I don't think we'll see some of the things that we saw this past year. I have to wonder if Jadeveon had tried to do under Jim Schwartz what he did last year in terms of not going onto the field on first and second down. What would the punishment have been? Would he have still even been on the team after that? Right? I mean, I don't know. I think it would have been a lot worse than what actually happened. You would never do that to Jim Schwartz or Bill Belichick or a Nick Saban or any of those guys. So I think, that, you're going to see a new era, a new brand of culture on that side of the ball. And I really think it's what's needed.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley, there's just something to be said about, like Mary Kay said, this guy's been a head coach. This guy's been a coordinator forever. He doesn't have a lot else to accomplish in his career. I don't know if he wants to be a head coach again. I don't know if that's his goal at some point down the road is to get one more shot as a head coach. But, he's kind of got nothing to lose. So if he wants to walk into Andrew Berry's office and say, listen, AB, we got to get rid of Jadeveon Clowney because he only played on third downs, Andrew's kind of got to listen, at least listen. Whether he actually does it or not, that's another thing. But he has to at least listen to him.
And I think it's important because, we talked about so much last week on Getaway Day and with the Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski press conference about culture. And it just feels like they need to bring in somebody different to shake that up at this point. You can't just run it back the way it's been here the last few years and expect something to change. And you think about Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry's demeanor, they're very similar to me. And a lot of these guys on Kevin Stefanski's staff, he coached with in Minnesota or had relationships with, everyone is very, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but they're just very similar to one another. And I do think you can benefit from getting more diverse voices into this room in terms of communication style, in terms of discipline style, in terms of outlook on the game, career experience. So I just think all of that is really important. And like you said, he doesn't have anything to lose. So why not speak your mind while you're here? And I'm sure he's done that throughout his career when you look at some of these numbers of the defenses he's been in charge of or associated with.
So I was thinking about something too when Ashley mentions kind of that, bringing in different viewpoints, and with Brian Flores and Jim Schwartz, Mary Kay, I think it's really good to bring someone into the building who isn't necessarily tied to someone, right? They're kind of coming in as this rogue person in a sense into the building. I'm genuinely curious what impact is this going to have on training camp? You've talked about it, guys sitting out and maybe not practicing. And I know some of that stems from the sports science stuff, then they're not going to just turn their backs on that. But I do wonder, is it going to be a little more hey, you're healthy, you're good. We need you on that field. we've got to kind of up things a little bit here in training camp. Just little things like that. I wonder if it'll impact those.
Yeah, I think it will impact everything, especially when, he has his own way of doing things. And I think that one of the important things to note about this is, I've covered a lot of Bill Belichick disciples and a lot of guys that have spent their whole entire career with Bill Belichick. And Jim Schwartz hasn't spent his whole entire career with Bill Belichick. He has the Bill Belichick sort of influence and a foundation, but then he moved on and they were not together after those 3 years here. They did not work together. The guys that have spent their whole entire career under Bill Belichick, I don't know, sometimes those guys struggle a little bit when they try to branch out on their own. Not all of them, but I think there's something to be said for having the Belichick foundation, but not becoming him by osmosis, not spending so much time with him that you think you are him. You know what I mean? He's so powerful and he's so, all knowing that guys that spend their whole entire career with him, sometimes it's just really hard to shake that and be yourself. And Jim Schwartz is just himself. Now, he does have a lot in common with Bill Belichick. He really does. He's got a lot in common with him. And these guys do have a tendency they're attracted to, from a work standpoint, guys that are sort of like them in some ways. Jim Schwartz has got the headbanging music. Bill Belichick was like that. They're very smart, economics major from Georgetown, could have gone on to Wall Street. We know a few other guys like that around here. So he's got the brain power to hang with the Harvards around this place. He can do that. But, by the same token, he's going to put his own stamp on it. He's also been, he didn't just fall off the turnip truck. He's 56 years old. Nothing's going to intimidate him. He doesn't necessarily need the job. He doesn't need the money. So, he can kind of do things his way. And I think that's what they need. Nobody's going to pull the wool over Jim Schwartz's eyes. He's going to be his own man. He's going to tell it like it is to whoever he needs to tell it like it is to. And I think it's a strength that they need at the position. Just a really, really strong human being.
Sort of an off-brand hire too, Ashley, kind of getting into what we were just talking about. When you looked at the candidates, right? A guy like Sean Desai just screamed this is the type of coach, young, upcoming, seems pretty analytically driven. I'm not saying Jim Schwartz isn't. I actually saw a tweet today that he was one of the first coordinators that reached out to the guys at Football Outsiders when they first launched. So I'm not saying Jim Schwartz is anti-analytics or anything, but you're thinking a younger guy that's the on-brand hire. And this is the off-brand hire.
Yeah, it seems to me in this Browns regime, the two kinds of on-brand hires are either that wonderkin kind of hire that you're talking about, and we've seen that before, right? Where these younger guys maybe get their starts here, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah being a prime example in a front office of doing that, or these guys that have some kind of prior connection. And like we said, Jim Schwartz doesn't have either, but I really do think that is needed. Again, I think I just want to see this with a different set of eyes on it more than anything. And somebody who maybe isn't going to have as many preconceived notions about working with the staff or working with Kevin Stefanski or what the defense was like last year and what flew and what didn't. I kind of want that fresh perspective, more than anything, I think. So I do. I just kind of he just seems to fit the bill in multiple areas. But Dan, I know you wrote today, I think it's kind of enough of winning these press conferences and winning these hires, right? You have to, at some point, it has to translate onto the field now. So I think that's really important here, that no one's getting ahead of themselves on Twitter or elsewhere about being super excited when we haven't seen anything on the field yet.
It's also sort of because this was the safe hire.
Yeah.
This wasn't a real risky. This was just sort of the safe, okay, Jim Schwartz, he's good at what he does. Let's see where this goes. Mary Kay, from a personnel standpoint, look, we knew coming into this, the Browns have they needed to do something with that defensive tackle room. This seems to indicate that they're going to have to do that. That's going to become a priority. Folks are going to hear Lance talk about some of the single high stuff that Jim Schwartz likes to play. And so you got to figure out, is John Johnson the right guy for that? What's next, I guess, for this team personnel wise? What do they need to focus on now that they have their coordinator and their scheme in place?
Well, first, before I address that, I just wanted to say really quickly that I think this is important. Jim Schwartz spent one solid year in Philadelphia while Andrew Berry was there. They spent a year together there in 2019. And so Andrew Berry got to know him, got to see how he worked. And I think that was important in where they landed right now. I think that was a key part of this. They know what they're getting. The Browns organization, they know what Jim Schwartz is all about, not just from his resume, not just from afar, but from a up close and personal look at what he does and how he does it. But from a personnel standpoint, I think that, first of all, we know he traditionally runs a wide 9 defense. So things might be a little bit different for Myles Garrett. So they're going to have to, work on that and figure out how they want to handle that whole situation because, as everyone knows, you want Myles Garrett to be the superstar that he is. You want him to be showcased. You want his strengths to be brought out and continually highlighted. So that will be one thing. We know that they need a number 2 edge. They need a number 2 edge because Jadeveon obviously is going to be gone. And I don't know yet that you can count on getting sacks out of Alex Wright since he didn't have any this year. Maybe Jim Schwartz can find a way to unlock the sacker that Alex Wright can possibly be. We'll find out. And then have to have that defensive tackle. You got to have the defensive tackle. They have to go find that guy. I would make it a priority. I would make it a big priority in this offseason. I don't know if, Dan, we talked about this on the HMK pod. I don't know if Daron Payne from the Commanders is going to make it to the market, but if he does make it to the market, that just reminds me, we've been laughing about this at my house. My mother once said, to my kids, your mother doesn't go to the market. But we've been laughing about that just for some reason over the last couple of days here. So whenever I say market, I have post-traumatic stress. But anyways, so I digress. We're using some big words on this pod today, aren't we?
Seriously, and I'm not the one using them, which is actually, I'm the English major.
Digress. I had an English minor, Dan. I will let you know.
There you go. But anyways, so if a guy like that gets to the market, I won't see him there, but if he gets to the market, then you want to go after a guy like that. You want to throw a bunch of money after somebody like that can come in and really just make that impact in the middle of your defense from a number of standpoints, from a rushing standpoint, from a stopping the run standpoint, and then having just that residual impact on your linebackers because you have to figure out what you're doing there. What if Jim Schwartz looks at the linebackers and thinks, we need some bigger guys. Now they do have Sione Takitaki who can come back from his torn ACL and, he's a good run stopper and not what you would consider a slider hybrid type / safety linebacker. But, he might look at that crew and think, we need some bigger guys there. Look, you're trying to play against the Baltimore Ravens in this division. So I think, these are some things to look at. When you look in the back end, he's going to have to help decide what he thinks John Johnson 3 can do for this defense. And if he thinks that JJ3 is the right kind of safety for this defense and has the versatility to do the things that he needs to do, I think JJ3 does have all kinds of versatility that he didn't really get to show here over the last couple of years, but he does come with a $13.5 million cap hit for 2023. So they're going to have to decide, if he is a, price fit and a scheme fit and all of those things. And, that's another thing. I just don't think that Jim Schwartz is going to be shy about evaluating the roster. In fact, he probably already gave them a pretty good evaluation during his interview of what he thinks the Browns have and what he thinks they need. And that, that's why you really can't in this particular hire go with, a super young guy, like for instance, like a Denard Wilson. You couldn't go with somebody that didn't have any experience calling a defense and wasn't necessarily going to be able to help you make some personnel decisions. I mean, we're talking about Jim Schwartz started his career here as a scout. So, he can help with all of that, and he will. And so, I just think you're getting a whole lot of talent in terms of another pair of eyes on these guys, and then also the whole coaching piece.
All right, there we go. Jim Schwartz will be hired as the new defensive coordinator of the Cleveland Browns. Maybe it'll be official by the time you hear this. I'm sure we'll hear from Jim here sometime soon as well in a press conference. So keep an eye out for that. Also, Lance Reisland is going to come up on the other side of the break. Mary Kay and Ashley, I will talk to both of you later. Welcome back to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. We're happy to welcome on Lance Reisland on the day that the Browns plan to hire Jim Schwartz as their new defensive coordinator. Lance, I know you've been doing a lot of work on these coordinators. Where was Schwartz kind of on your list as far as who you liked for this team?
For what they have with Stefanski, I thought it was very, very important because Stefanski's that offensive coordinator as a head coach, and he needed a guy who was a head coach, in my opinion, on the other side of the ball that can take care of all those daily activities in terms of clock management, how they run practice. So he is the head coach. Everything runs through Stefanski, obviously, but if you're going to call plays, that amount of work during the week, he has to be able to delegate that responsibility to someone else who has 13, 14 years of experience, head coaching experience. I think Schwartz's scheme is going to be very good for the Browns. They have some things they need to work on. But I thought he's a pretty good fit for what the Browns. He's the most reliable, safe pick for the Browns.
Yeah, the head coaching experience part of it was interesting to me because I just look at it like, I remember when Sean McVay took that Rams job and he hired Wade Phillips, and it was very much like I just hired a head coach for the defense. That's sort of what this feels like to me.
Yeah, and in terms of like the daily, so on game day, it's going to be Stefanski's call in terms of timeouts and punt and all that kind of stuff. But the daily grind of getting practice plans ready, getting scripts ready, how you're going to attack with a scouting report, looking ahead at the team you're going to, the red zone stuff and the third down stuff and how you're going to do coming out and short yardage and third and medium. That takes up Stefanski's time. He's the play caller, so all that, him and Van Pelt, that takes up all his time. He needs a guy on the other side of the ball that's doing all that. And that guy will report to him and tell him what the plan is. But you got to have faith in that guy that he is basically the head coach. He's the head coach of the defense. Everything runs through him. And that'll make Stefanski's brain a little bit less stressed on game day.
Okay, when people hear the name Jim Schwartz, the first thing that pops in their mind is wide nine. So explain that. What is the wide nine that Jim Schwartz likes to run?
Well, those defensive ends. So the defensive ends for the Browns, if there's a tackle, it's going to actually be a wide 5. And if it's a tight end, it's actually going to be a wide 9. So it's going to be just the alignment of that defensive end is going to be really wide on the last man on the line of scrimmage. And for a defensive coordinator, there's two ways you can look at defense, and there's two underlying principles. You're either a team that funnels everything inside, or you're a team that spills everything to the sideline. And Schwartz is a guy who likes to funnel everything inside. So those defensive ends for the Browns are now going to be lined up wide, real wide of the last man on the line of scrimmage. Again, a wide 9 or wide 5, and they're going to funnel everything in. So they're going to be able to set the edge very well by alignment. And you're going to see some different stuff in terms of coverage. But that wide 9 alignment, you're just going to see those ends in sprinter stances. They're going to be down, and they're just going to be getting upfield, not allowing teams to get to the edge.
And just, for people who are listening to this and wondering about, the numbers system, things like that, it starts at nose tackle. If you're over the nose tackle, that's 0. And then you start to count out, right? So if you're in between the center and the guard, you're at 1. If you're on the guard, you're at 2. If you're in between the guard and the tackle, you're at 3. Tackle, you're right. That's how you kind of count that out.
Yeah, it's weird. There's some different ways to do it but for the most part, yeah, the everything is head up is an even number. So 2, 4, 6 is a head up. So you have a head up on the guard would be a 2. Like you said, a head up on the center would be a 0. Head up on the tackle would be a 4. Head up on the tight end would be a 6. Outside eye is going to be a 3 and a 5. inside of the guard is going to be a 2-eye, inside the tackle is going to be a 4-eye, and then in some weird world, the tight end is always the weird one. So head up on the tight end is a 6, inside the tight end is a 7, outside the tight end is a 9. So that's the one that really doesn't make sense. I heard a lot of podcasts. I actually heard the Kelsey brothers talking about it one time in their podcast. It's just a weird thing that has been around forever. But, yeah, as you're moving out, you get and then obviously that wide 5 outside the tackle and that wide 9 outside the tight end.
Okay, so the first question here then, when we talk about where guys align, is how does this affect Myles Garrett?
Well, once again, I'm doing some research. I really believe his defense magnifies the strengths of the Browns roster, and I think it magnifies the weaknesses. So the strength of what it does, he does a great job of creating one-on-ones for his defensive tackles and his defensive ends. So he's going to do stuff like where he's going to get the guard is going to be head up. Well, the defensive tackle is going to be outside the guard. So he's going to be in a wide 3. And then that the DN will be in a wide 5 or wide 9. Similar to what they did this year, but what he does is that he shows linebackers in gaps, and he's going to create one-on-ones for Myles because of the width of those guys. The other thing, however, the disadvantage of that is that a lot of times that offensive tackle is not going to be covered. And when that offensive tackle is not covered, he has free reign to get to that defensive tackle and free reign to get to that second level. So we used to use the term heavy, where you're going to try to split, you're going to take that foot and you're going to split right down the middle of that offensive tackle. So he can't have free reign and just go hammer your defensive tackle. So it puts a lot more pressure on a position group that you and I both know needs some work here in the offseason. So it's going to magnify his ability to pass rush, and it's also going to magnify the difficulties that those defensive tackles are having.
So, of course, the issue of personnel is going to come up. Can the defensive tackles the Browns have now, will this make them better? It sure doesn't sound like it. Will this make them better? Is this just like kind of what we've thought all season? They're just going to have to remake that position.
I don't think it helps them at all. Now, in a perfect world, some of these guys I think can be third down guys, nickel guys come in and nickel pass rush. I do think it helps them with their pass rush. But on that first and second down, heavy rundowns, I do not think it helps them at all. In fact, this scheme is actually worse than the scheme that just got out of, because there is no protection from that defensive end. That defensive end, we used to always say, get your hands on that offensive tackle. Why do you get your hands on the offensive tackle? So he can't run free to that defensive tackle and create that easy double team with that guard. And when you get those easy double teams, so now he can get an easy double team, and that big tackle now doesn't have to worry about anything if he's right to the second level. So if that defensive tackle is lined up inside the guard, the defensive tackle doesn't even need to help. And if that defensive end is in a wide 5 or a wide 9, now that tackle can run right to those undersized linebackers. So I do not think they're going to need to get some beef in there. Everything we've talked about over the last 3 or 4 months, they have to improve the style of defensive tackle inside.
What about the linebackers? Because you mentioned it seems like this scheme exposes linebackers a little more to the offensive linemen. So am I wrong about that, first of all? And secondly, if that's the case, are the Browns linebackers big enough for this scheme?
It's going to be, the thing is, if they can get some big defensive tackles, it will help, because that'll occupy some of those guys, because they won't be able to get off on those double teams so easily. I do think these guys can run really, really well sideline to sideline. They're almost like I talked about the spill, where everything is going to run sideline to sideline. If they're going to stick with the linebackers they have, they're going to need to make sure those defensive tackles are adjusted. And they're also going to need to adjust on first and second down, that wide 9 technique a little bit. They're going to have to close that down if they don't improve that defensive tackle room. But yeah, it does. Those linebackers this day and age running sideline to sideline, if they can get some big guys inside, they'll be fine.
So I was looking at, this morning, just looking at some of Schwartz's kind of some of the raw stats of his defenses. And I know that when he got to Philly, what he did to that defense was it's a big reason why they won that Super Bowl in 2017. And the run defense was really good. The pass defenses have sort of been middle of the road here and there, but the run defense has been really good. I mean, how does this scheme, I guess, sort of help the run defense? I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but how does it change this run defense?
Well, with different personnel, or adjustments in personnel, it's going to help. I mean, bottom line is, without better personnel inside, it doesn't matter the scheme. And I will stick by that. It doesn't matter what the scheme is. If those guys get blown off the ball, it will not matter. When you're talking about when he was with the Titans, he had Hainsworth. When he's with Philly, he had Fletcher Cox. So you're talking about grown men in there that are able to take on double teams and pass rush, kind of like a Deron Payne, a little bit of both. They at least need to get guys that can take on doubles. I think those guys were good against the run because they're very fundamentally sound. So they're going to funnel everything inside, and then those guys, defensive tackles, should be occupying those double teams. And then what Schwartz does is that he likes to play with one high hat. So I think the guy that can be the most productive in this new scheme is going to be Delpit, because Delpit's going to be down in that box a lot because he likes to play one high hat and have those safeties and linebackers run in the alley and make those tackles as those defensive ends set the edge.
Oh, well, that's certainly good news there for Grant Delpit, who finished strong this year, to give him an opportunity to maybe thrive in this defense. So let's talk about the secondary. What can Browns fans expect now from this secondary under Jim Schwartz?
Well, they're going to get exactly what a lot of people have been talking about. He's going to play a lot of man coverage. They're going to be in one high hat. They're going to be in cover one, like I said, with those safeties, with those corners, pressing the line of scrimmage. They're going to be Grant Delpit's going to be down in the box a lot, especially when you get a tight end look. So if they're going to be in that wide nine, that gap between the tackle and tight end, now with the wide nine is kind of unprotected. And obviously when you have a tight end, it's more of a run set. So Delpit will be down in that C gap, being a run fit guy, along with those other linebackers when they have a true tight end set in there. They're going to be in something called a pattern match cover 3, which goes way back to when with the Saban Belichick days, where they kind of came up with this rip and Liz that Saban's been famous for at Alabama, where they're going to play a match kind of cover 3, where they're going to pattern match and read routes. So it's worrisome at times because of the Browns' communication. But they're also going to be a lot of that pattern match is man coverage. So most of the time, a guy like Ward, who you would think is their best corner, majority of the time, Ward's going to be on the best guy, and he's going to be in press man coverage by himself. And that's going to happen a lot in this defense. And there's going to be he's going to follow the best guy. He's going to take him no matter where he goes. And then they're going to pattern match on the other side. And they're going to, whatever the route combinations are. It's a pretty complex yet simple kind of scheme, but a lot of it is there's going to be one safety. They're going to need to get a safety, whether it's John Johnson, whoever it is. That's free safety now needs to become a center fielder, and he's got to make plays over the top and be able to cover from sideline to sideline. But they're going to see what they want. They're going to see a lot of man coverage. You're going to see a lot of one high hat. If that team's in a run set, they're going to be packing the box. It's aggressive. Those corners are going to be in receivers' faces. They try to route adjust a lot. So it's going to be aggressive on the edges for sure.
Okay, so, you mentioned the communication stuff. And, one of the first thoughts I had today is Jim Schwartz is coming in, and he's been doing this for a long time. And to me, aside from scheme, aside from all that stuff, this is Jim Schwartz. The communication stuff, he's going to get that cleaned up. The discipline stuff, he's going to get that cleaned up. That's a part of this too, right?
Oh, there's no question. Having that head coach type of mentality, that's absolutely right. And you said at the beginning of the pod here, he's going to handle all that stuff, that day-to-day routine in terms of getting lined up, their practice habits, their attention to detail, lining up, formation recognition, all that stuff that no one sees on a daily basis. So, a guy like Schwartz is going to come out and they're going to go over every formation, and and a lot of those guys do that. But when you have a guy who has been proven, he's a Super Bowl winner. So he has that track record and that background where they're going to do a lot of boring stuff and a lot of stuff that's attention to detail. And a lot of stuff is the do your job, the Bill Belichick of kind of you have a role, star in your role. In some defenses, you're going to thrive. In other defenses, you're going to allow other people to thrive. But everybody has a job to do. He's a big matchup guy, so he's going to find matchups for the Browns' best players, Garrett to the second level, whatever it may be. JOK is going to come on more blitzes. There's going to be things that he is a player's coach, but when I think of a player's coach, I don't think of a guy everybody likes. I think of a guy that puts people in positions to make plays. That's what players like. Players don't want to be friends with coaches. Players want to be able to go make plays and play fast. And that's what I used to always tell my coaches, is that you don't have to be their best friend. You have to be able to put them in positions to make plays. And at that level, those are grown men. So those guys they're not hanging out. They want to know that what they're doing is sound and it allows them to make plays. And that's what his track record is. So I'm excited for that second level for sure.
Yeah. Myles Garrett doesn't need more friends. What Myles Garrett wants is 20 sacks. That's what he wants.
You constantly hear him talk. Yeah, you constantly hear about Myles talking about getting doubled all the time. Well, schematically, Jim Schwartz is going to do a fantastic job of creating a one-on-one opportunity, bringing 3 over 2 over on that side, or 4 over 3, or getting knowing where the slide in the protection is going and make sure Myles is away from the slide, and making sure Myles is getting the one-on-ones that will make him be successful. Schwartz is known for that. He's going to create one-on-one matchups up front without question.
Okay, last question here. We're going to put on the GM hat. We know that the Browns need defensive tackles, so that's number 1. What's number 2? Now that they know who their defensive coordinator is, what's number 2 on your list for position of need?
Well, this is twofold. So one is if they get those defensive tackles, then I think the linebackers are okay. If they don't get the defensive tackles with size, they're going to have to get a thumper in size, especially on first and second down. Maybe it's a guy who's just a first and second down linebacker. Ragland's kind of that guy, that big thumper, tackle to tackle, a guy who's not a sideline to sideline guy. But I think they will address it. So for me, I would say their pressing need in this one hi-hat safety is a guy who is a center fielder at the back end, a guy who can go sideline to sideline. He's going to be a guy who double teams guys. He's going to be a guy who understands the formation and the routes that come out of that formation, a guy who watches a ton of film, a guy who's got tremendous speed and length, who can kind of get under, fades to the, get off one hash and get to a fade on the other hash. That guy's got to be a center fielder and a playmaker, because I think they feel, and I think the Browns going to next year with this scheme, their number one thing they have in the scheme is Myles is going to get one-on-one and their corners can cover in man. And so for me, it would be that ball hawking, find the ball, free safety would be my second after the DTs. A distant second, a way distant second after those DTs. But it would definitely be that ball hawking free.
Yeah, Lance has been texting me defensive tackles even before this hire. So he's been on the defensive tackle beat here for a little while, and I know you've put some stuff up on the website for that too. You can find it all Twitter. If you find Lance on Twitter, it's just at Lance Reisland, Reisland. He's got some stuff on the defensive tackles there as well. Lance, I appreciate you doing this on short notice. It was good stuff. Thanks for the time.
As always, thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks to Lance Reisland for joining us to break down Jim Schwartz's scheme. We'll have full coverage of the Jim Schwartz hire at cleveland.com/Browns, so make sure you check that out. Also, become a Football Insider subscriber. You get a newsletter delivered every single day to your inbox. You get access to exclusive stories on cleveland.com/Browns, and you can become one of our text subscribers. And, of course, make sure you're subscribed to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, make sure you leave us a 5-star review and say something nice about us. We like to read that stuff. For Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock, and Lance Reisland, I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for listening, everybody.